really we were doing a deep dive into the topic of forgiveness. And are there times where people have crossed the point beyond which you not only do not need to forgive them, but shouldn't forgive them? That is a controversial topic, and we are going to look at that next on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Welcome to Journey to Healing. Do you find yourself discouraged, troubled, in need of healing, but not sure where to turn? Jon Uhler, a licensed professional counselor, is here to help. Jon has more than 25 years of professional experience helping people deal with the issues that keep them emotionally and spiritually stuck. There is help. There is hope. There is a God who loves you and wants to help you find peace and strength. And Jon Uhler is here to help you find that on this edition of Journey to Healing.
Welcome back, everyone, and it is good to be back. We had some technical issues, as a matter of fact, so much so that I had to buy a new computer to try to get things up and running. Maybe because the topics we cover here are so powerful that my electronics couldn't handle it, but it's good to be back. I am broadcasting to you live from TECN.TV, the leader in Internet TV. We are here every Friday night, as long as our computer equipment holds out, from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the U.S. And again, over the past number of years, quite frankly, we have been looking at some of the primary issues that we all deal with when it comes to trying to have a reasonably balanced life. That usually has to do with how we are interacting with other people. And that usually has to do with our boundaries. As I tell people in my own counseling practice, that there are two issues that inevitably will come into play when it comes to mental health, when it comes to being reasonably adjusted. And that has to do with these two issues. So what's nice is all you have to do is focus on really these two issues. And a lot of the symptoms, which might be called mental health issues, a lot of those will start to subside. So whether it be panic attacks, whether it's depression, whether it's anxiety, and those are really on a continuum, right? Anxiety is on a continuum, what's called generalized anxiety disorder, all the way to panic attacks. So if you have any of that anywhere in between, you would have an anxiety disorder. How about a mood disorder that really has to do with depression, the ups and downs in life? You can have hyper, right? And that might be a way we might say that somebody is a little, layman's terms, we might say they're all over the place, or they have a little too much energy. So that could be a hypomanic state, or a manic state, I should say. So that also can be best understood if it's not an organic issue. And that's why I always recommend see your doctor first, right? There could be something going on. If you affect the endocrine system, by the way, you will affect your mood. You'll affect your ability to attend to things as far as focusing, your ability to concentrate, your ability to comprehend, your ability to be emotionally stable. So you want to make sure that physically everything is okay. Once that checks out, then if you're having a hard time with stabilizing your mood, if you are having a hard time with anxiety, if you're having a hard time with negative thoughts, if you're having a hard time with, self-deprecating thoughts, that would be negative thoughts. If you're having a hard time with setting goals, then you might want to look at these two issues. So again, everything comes down to, in my estimation, these two issues: unresolved grief and loss, which prevents you from being able to put the past in the past. If, whether you know it or not, if you keep dragging the past into the present, that's very easy to do. One of the reasons why we have a hard time resolving past issues is there really are no masochists. We've sort of heard that there aren't. Okay, a genuine masochist would be this person. I've never met them before. It would be somebody who says they go to the dentist and opt not to have Novocaine if they're having fillings. Okay, I've never met that person yet. That would be a genuine masochist. Okay, there are no masochists. Why? Because we don't like pain. That's why the majority of people in the U.S. take painkillers of some sort. So we try to alleviate pain. That's the reason why we don't attend to things in the past. We think time heals all wounds and we move on. But the question is, though we have moved on, has that really healed time? Or, I'm sorry, has that really healed the issue? Or are we on some level we covered it over, did a band aid approach, and now we're moving on into the future? What you'll find with that is you'll be pretty compulsive in some fashion. Now, what do compulsions look like? By the way, the word compulsion, you break it down into its etymology, its component parts, and it means with power. Something is acting on me with power if I'm compulsive. Why? In order to really, the greater pain wins out. It's in order to keep me away from something. The most profound kind of compulsive disorder is self-injurious behavior. If you've ever seen the results of self-cutting, and for those of us that don't understand that, if you've ever really seen it, the kind that almost needs stitches, um, people don't understand that it actually doesn't hurt while the person is cutting. Later on, it hurts, but during that point, as they are cutting, they don't feel it, which shows you how amazing the mind is. People sort of understand that. Let's say if you've got in a car accident and you go into shock a little bit, you probably won't feel the immediate pain. So the mind has the ability to compartmentalize, to somehow corral that pain and put it somewhere. With trauma, that's what happens. But the question is it gone? So just because I don't feel it consciously, is it all resolved? It's very easy then to bring the past into the present. So let's say I have relationships that were not resolved. Let's say very painful ones. What you will find with a person that has not resolved past issues, they'll have a hard time getting close to someone, or they will have a tendency to take on responsibility that is not theirs, to placate, to enable, to rescue. And we've been talking about that. As a matter of fact, I recommend this will be good for some of you to go to SurvivorSupport.net under the podcast tab, and you will see a repository of past programs. And I won't do a lot of reviewing. We have done a lot of reviewing in the past. We really focus on Matthew chapter 7, verse 6 as sort of a foundational text when Jesus said this. A lot of you will remember our favorite picture here, right? He says, do not take what is special and give it to dogs, and do not, or holy. The word hagiadzo in the Greek means something very special, like good china. So don't take what is special and give it to dogs, and do not cast your pearls before swine. Let me see what happened here. I'm looking technologically. What did I just do? There we go. Okay, so I'll bring it back there. Okay, let me see if I remember how to do this. Nope, I'm still learning. Where did our pig go? I don't know. So, oh, there's our pig. Wow, is it number 4? Nope, that's not. Hold on. I bet it's number 3. No, it's not. I can't even remember how to do that. I'll figure it out. My little square is supposed to be up there in the corner. But anyways, the pigs and the dogs, we don't want to do that. Okay, because those will be people that will take and take and take no matter what you give. And again, that has to do with another analogy. We've used this in the past. This is really what everything comes down to, in my estimation. If things get out of whack, it's because you have either less or more than one knapsack. So the goal in life is to have one knapsack, no more and no less. There's 2 things that will mess us up. One is if I either have no knapsacks, that would be because of selfishness. If I have more than one knapsack, that is because I then have a fear-based relationship that can look like this. Here's an extreme relationship. That's a one up, one down relationship. The person on the right is taking advantage of the person on the left. The person on the left, their knapsack is green. So the person with the blue knapsack, little by little, has been giving them their knapsacks, and that is the recipe for disaster. And what will happen with that? We've seen this a lot. That will be the basis of all stress. So if you continue in that kind of relationship where people are dumping, and ultimately you can't control other people, so the only thing you can do is control yourself. If you keep accepting other people's responsibility, what will you be like? You will end up like one of those, right? So the body keeps the score. Let me see if I can bring my picture. No, I'm still trying to remember how to do this. I have a new version of this. Of this. I'm sorry. Me and technology. So, anyways, we look at these pictures right there, and look at what goes on in the body. And if the flip side of hurt is anger, look at the top left. Okay, trust me, you don't want to be um, in any of those states, really, except for happiness. It's right in the middle top center. And then look at love. No, that's nice. But look at the difference, right? As a matter of fact, think of what happens in the GI tract. Do any of you have irritable bowel syndrome? If you do, I'm going to see if I can bring my picture up. No, I'm not bringing my picture. I'm not trying to play games with anybody here. The technology has really changed, and I am not finding it. Okay, um, so I'll have to. Anyways, what happens in the bowels? Think about that. Look at there's very where it's dark in this picture. There's very little activity. So if you have anything other than a calm state going on, then your food does not move through you very quickly, and therefore you become full of it. Don't you? No, that's okay. Moving on, but it's true, right? Now we are never to give over our knapsack, but we are not to take anybody else's. If we do, then we will feel the stress. And that is very different. That comes out of Galatians chapter 5. Paul says everybody should own their own load, but bear one another's burdens. And we've seen that this is a burden. A burden is something beyond someone's control. It is now on you. Let's say the death of someone you cared about. So now that is on you. How this will play out, and the reason why it's so important to review this during a series on. Let's see if we're doing okay here. During a series on grief and loss, is because I'm just making sure technologically I'm broadcasting here. I need a pretty. Yes, I am. Okay. The reason why it's so important is if I don't have things resolved, I will end up going downhill. And I'll end up going downhill with somebody who I'll be taken for a ride, quite frankly. Let me see if I can bring my picture up one more time. I'm going to try all the buttons here, folks. No, that's not it. Okay, bear with me. Boy, they have changed some of this computer program stuff, huh? Nope. Yeah, one more, and okay. So thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to try one more. That certainly is not it. Okay. Well, I used to be able to bring my little picture up, so I'll figure out that. You know that little piece of technology is still there. So looking at this picture, we have looked at this a lot. This is moving from a positive relationship down into the negative. We've talked about what happens in the pig zone if you get down in there with someone who is a pig. And that's why Jesus said, do not cast your pearls before swine. So there's a whole lot to that. We have looked at that in the past. That is why it is so important to be able to have your bearings in a relationship, meaning being able to discern what is and isn't yours, what is and isn't your responsibility. What else is there in the current day that's going to mess us up so we can bring the past into the present? We can be dragging that along. That will inhibit our ability to ultimately have boundaries. So the two issues in life that will mess us up are unresolved grief and loss, and the issue of boundaries. Life is challenging enough, and people are challenging enough. But if I can't discern, and if I've got a lot of sort of open windows in the background, thinking in terms of technology, let's say you can have a bunch of windows open on your phone and you wonder why your battery keeps dying all the time. Well, that's because all your resources are being sapped. So it's a crucial thing to be able to close all the windows. That's a pretty good picture of truly leaving the past in the past. So with each window, with each relationship, with each thing that has happened in the past, you have to be able to truly close them. I really like that, right? You have to be able to bring closure because one window at a time in the here and now is enough. And one of the things that now I'm shifting, we're going to talk about the issue of forgiveness now, because that is one of the trickiest issues that can keep somebody stuck in the past. The question is when it comes to relationships, especially a relationship with someone that has been hurtful, what do you do with that? Now, it's one thing for someone to have been hurtful, but they attempted to make amends for that. That's reasonable. But what happens if they've never apologized? And let's say it's not a minor thing. We're going to talk about that. If you have ever come across something like this little meme, you might feel very guilty. It says, I never knew how strong I was until I had to forgive someone who wasn't sorry and accept an apology I never received. Now, let me see if I can, there we are. Okay, now, let's read that again. I never knew how strong I was. Okay, so, wow, we're digging down deep inside ourselves. I never knew how strong I was until I had to forgive someone who wasn't sorry and accept an apology I never received. Okay, I want you to know that that is psychobabble, number one, because you can't receive an apology that's never given. Oh gosh, that one, it's just painful all the time. I feel compelled. Let me bring it back again. Okay. And then we're going to go in depth again, as we have been, on what is and isn't forgiveness. Okay. Because this is something, no, I can't because the little button is clicked. Okay. There we are. So I never knew how strong I was. And so a lot of people are feeling weak because they, quote unquote, just can't forgive someone. So I never knew how strong I was until I had to forgive. So isn't that interesting? They're faced with forgiving who? Someone that's not sorry and accept an apology I never received. Okay, the last part of that should be really clear. You can't accept an apology you never received because they didn't give that to you. So we can wipe that off the board right there. Now, do you have to forgive someone who is not sorry? And that is what we've been going into. Do you have to? Well, the real question is it even possible? And the answer is it is not possible. Why? Because we humans don't have it within ourselves to forgive like God forgives. No. No, that when I use the term it is impossible, it would be like telling someone to go up onto the fifth floor of a building, flap their arms vigorously, and fly. Now, the question is, are they able? Why? Because they don't have the ability like a bird to fly? No, it's not going to happen, right? It goes against natural law. This goes against spiritual law, and I'm aware of what I'm saying, okay? In this sense, that we need to be very accurate because only the truth is going to set us free. There's a song a number of years ago now that talked about forgiveness, and ultimately forgiveness sets us free. That is not true. Genuine forgiveness ties you in a knot until you can work through your feelings. Forgiveness is a judicial act. It's an act of letting someone, of really canceling a debt. It's a banking term. Well, that presupposes a debt has been acknowledged. If you go to the bank and say, or if you never go to the bank and they're wanting their money and you ignore them, are they unforgiving to foreclose on your home? No, they are pretty normal. If you go and you tell them, in some less than polite manner, that you walk right in and you say, hey, I think you're being unforgiving. I don't think I need to even acknowledge this debt. What are they going to do? Yeah, they're going to foreclose on your home. But if you go with hat in hand in humility and brokenness, acknowledging the debt, maybe you can throw yourself on their mercy, and then it's up to them, they possibly could take out what out of the drawer. It's a stamp. And what on that stamp, what does it read on the stamp that you really would like to see across a debt? You would like to see the word forgiven. Forgiveness presupposes there is something there and that it has been acknowledged so that everyone knows what is being forgiven. But especially the guilty party, if they're not going to acknowledge, then there is nothing to forgive. Nothing is out on the table. So to forgive someone, which is not possible, who's not sorry. Again, we use the verse 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sins, then he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. That is a conditional promise. It says if, really if and only when. And confess means to say the exact same thing as. We are forgiven by God when we come to terms with the stuff that we've done, when we acknowledge, when we say exactly what he says about it. It's not our opinion that matters. It's the injured party. So when someone confesses to God, they are laying it all out there, even the stuff they can't bring to mind because there's probably so much because we all sin. So the question is, at what point does God forgive us? He forgives us, as he says, when we confess. So it is not unforgiving not to accept a non-apology. That's right, to let that sink in. So not accepting a non-apology is not unforgiveness because forgiveness has never been sought. So you are not unforgiving if you do not forgive someone that's never asked for forgiveness because there's nothing to forgive. So allow yourself to let that inaccurate belief go. Now, what are we talking about when it has to do with sins, so to speak, or shall we say negative impact? Okay, a sin is an archery term, meaning I missed the mark. Okay, I'm able to hit a bullseye, but I choose not to. Okay, when it has to do with forgiveness, it has to do with either myself against another person or someone else against me. It has to do with boundaries. When boundaries have been crossed, there's a transgression, there's a trespass. So the issue of forgiveness will match the extent to which there has been both confession, but confession that matches the offense. So I'm going to bring up a chart, and it's a shame that I still can't work my little yeah, let me see. I'm going to try here just for a second. Now that didn't work. Stay with me, folks. Now that one, okay, I'm going to try it again. Nope. You see me. And okay, we're just going to have to do it this way and I'll learn. It's a brand new system that I'm working with here. Okay, so when we're talking about forgiveness, here's a chart that hopefully is going to help you understand, help all of us understand what we're talking about. Because if you just say everybody needs to forgive everybody no matter what, first of all, no matter whether confession, no, that is not true. Because I'm back again. Remember, for forgiveness presupposes somebody has confessed, somebody has acknowledged. If there's no acknowledgement, then there's no confession. Why? Because the person hasn't asked for forgiveness. There's nothing out on the table to discuss. Now the question is, what is going on when forgiveness is requested, or what needs to go on? Because people say, well, sin is a sin is a sin. No, that's not true, right? There's different degrees of impact. That's why in the Old Testament, for instance, there was a line beyond which once you crossed a certain line, you were executed. Just prior to that, what's interesting is there were no prisons in Israel based upon Israel's guidelines that God gave them or prescriptions. So the prisons that we read about in the Old Testament and the New Testament were not designed by Israel, right? Because prison really doesn't do much good for anyone. Just sitting and thinking about it doesn't do much. So it's interesting to know that that was really not God's idea. If you cross certain lines, you are executed, and that's actually very therapeutic for what? The survivor, the victim. I think a lot of the field of psychology would dry up and blow away if victims could see the perpetrator under a pile of rocks with their feet sticking out. But it's because they don't see that that a lot of the trauma that is under the surface, the flip side of hurt, trauma comes from hurt. What kind of hurt? Being overwhelmed, being placed in a situation where you can't control the outcome and it is overwhelming to you. You had no control over it. It was impinging upon you, or you were losing control, and all the responsibility, all the impact was going to be on you. So we were not designed to experience overwhelming trauma. Prior to the fall, there was no traumatic event. So we're designed now in such a way to try to deal with trauma, which is dealing with things that are unnatural. So the only thing that makes sense about loss is that it doesn't make sense. The greater the degree of emotional impact, the more really the meaning and the implications are what somebody's going to have to work through. That's very, very difficult. But it's going to match the degree of personal assault or personal injury, shall we say. We have physical personal injury, but then we can have pain and suffering. And not all injury is physical. Are you aware of that? Right? You can be betrayed. There's no marks left on you, but your life can forever be changed. So we're going to go back to this chart now and begin to look at degrees of impact, because confession then should match the degree of impact. Okay, so I've written down here degrees of negative intentionality. So this is going to be discerning the extent to which somebody can impact somebody else. Okay, so in taking into account forgiveness, it first takes into account confession, and that should match in terms of the degree of negative intentionality. To what extent did the person intend to harm you? Right? They actually wanted to have to hurt you versus they didn't. Degree of negative impact. So we've got somebody that was intentional or not. To what extent did they harm you? What was the impact? And the degree of willful disregard. Did they care or not? Think about an auto accident. Now look at our scale of 1 to 10 here. I'm taking this, though, using it in the emotional realm, but I'm using this in terms of, let's say, just physically, whether a car accident or some other kind of physical action that negatively impacts somebody. So, scale of 1 to 10, we have the very minor things that we all do. And when we're talking about the kind of forgiveness that requires this kind of program, we are not talking about the lower levels. Okay, we're not talking about a level 1. When we say there's nothing to forgive, in a way, we are talking about, well, somebody may have done something, but we can tell it's accidental or human error. When Paul says, bear with one another's faults, this is the level he's talking about. We all do that. But if you have a conscience, what's going to happen? You're going to acknowledge this, right? Because there's been an impact. If it starts to progress, we now have what I call emotional misdemeanors, right? So this is not worthy of a huge kind of repercussion, but now the impact is getting bigger. Negative intentionality. There may not have been a lot of intentionality, but there could have been negligence. Okay, so somebody was not somebody was doing something without thinking about it. They were self-absorbed. Using the idea of driving a car, that could be where they are distracted, a distracted driver. Now the question is, what was distracting them? How about if they didn't care for their car. They didn't continue to do maintenance on it. And because of their negligence, then something happened. Their brakes locked up, or they couldn't brake in time. And so what happened? Or the tire blew out, and they were driving on bare threads, anyways, on their steel belted radials, and let's say they couldn't brake in time. Okay, so that you still have an accident, but the degree of intentionality is different. Negative impact, that's going to be pretty consistent. Although there will be some situations where, depending upon the person, it doesn't impact them as much. Um, if you're a single mom, you're going to be impacted a whole lot more by certain things than if you have somebody that's helping you carry the weight. How about the degree of willful disregard? So that has to do with empathy, quite frankly. If you don't have empathy, then you don't care about the impact. And in fact, if that builds, you really could get to a point where you care less. And so now you don't care about the degree of impact. This all matters when it comes to the issue of forgiveness. Because if you are telling someone they have to forgive, like our little meme there, forgive something that's never confessed, then you are disregarding what God takes into account, which He takes into account personal responsibility and degree of impact. And it adds insult to injury if you tell a victim that they have to forgive someone that is not sorry, and to basically, what's our little meme go, and accept an apology that was never received. Because an apology that's never received is a non-apology. And we will continue to look at what is the impact of someone who becomes actually very calculating. We will look at that on the other side of the break.
Are you or someone you know a survivor of abuse and wondering where to turn for trustworthy help and insight into the effects of such abuse? Ever wish you had access to a resource that could help you continue your progress in healing? SurvivorSupport.net is that resource. Developed by Jon Uhler, a seasoned therapist with years of experience working with sexual abuse survivors, SurvivorSupport.net is a one-of-a-kind resource to help you understand the impact of abuse and to help you understand the nature of those who harmed you in order to help you gain clarity and continue healing. If you are interested in speaking with Jon Uhler about your situation or in having Jon conduct a consultation or a training for your church or organization, SurvivorSupport.net serves as a convenient method of contacting him. Our program, Journey to Healing, is made possible through the generous donations of viewers like you. There are many opportunities and needs that Survivor Support is attempting to meet, and your monthly support or one-time gift would be extremely helpful as we seek to meet those needs and opportunities. Simply visit SurvivorSupport.net and you will see the link to donate on the homepage. We thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jon Uhler. This is Journey to Healing. We are here every Friday night, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on TECN.TV, the leader in Internet TV. Prior to the break, we were looking at and really picking up where we left off before sort of an extended time away due to technical issues. We've been looking at the issue of forgiveness because in the field of counseling, forgiveness is one of the most important issues, but I think oftentimes misunderstood. So, as a matter of fact, oftentimes what happens in the counseling situation is we help people get in touch with their emotions, which is a significant part of counseling, because most people are cut off from their emotions. Why? Because there's pain under the surface, they had to take the person had to take the pain and shove it somewhere, meaning they put it in sort of a closet or a trap door. And now, instead of being a human being, they are human doing. But things are oozing out. They're either emotionally reactive, which has to do with one extreme or the other. They're reactive, like we think people might be. So they are a little over the top, or they're very much over the top. They have anger issues. Um, or they immediately shut down. So, either of those two extremes, according to Murray Bowen in extended family systems therapy, he would call that emotional reactivity. That is one of my favorite terms. So, to the extent that I am emotionally reactive, is the extent to which I am not healed, and is the extent to which I am emotionally immature. There's no other way to put that. I'm emotionally immature, and the extent to which I still am in need of attending to that if I ever want to grow spiritually, meaning I'm stuck. So if you have buttons and triggers, you are emotionally reactive. How do you know? Because when somebody pushes your buttons or triggers, what happens? So the goal of life is not to have any buttons or triggers. Now, for some people, they can't imagine that, and they think, well, the only person without any buttons would be somebody that's dead. Well, let me ask you this. Did Jesus ever have any buttons or triggers? No, he did not. And some of you might recall and therefore say, well, wait a second, he went into that temple. He really kicked butt, took no names. And I don't mean to be, right. That's not, I'm not being disrespectful. I mean, he made a whip. You don't make a whip if you're not going to intend to use it. You got to be an actual maniac. If you're kicking over tables of money, you touch somebody's money and now you're going to get a response out of them. Why didn't anybody rush him? Why didn't anybody tackle him? He was a crazy person. I've seen a few of those when I was working on the psychology staff in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. You can have somebody that is so crazy, and we've seen certain films, a lot of people have, like on uh, police officers are trying to arrest somebody on PCP, and there's 12 officers that are trying to bring one guy down. So you can have one person extremely intimidating. So there was something about Jesus when he tapped into that righteous indignation that nobody wanted to touch. They left their money and ran. Well, did his button get pushed, or was he triggered? No, because he already knew what was going on in there, but he allowed his righteous indignation to come out at the right time. So it was spirit controlled anger. But if you're emotionally reactive, that means you're going to go to one extreme or the other, and you won't even have a choice, though you're responsible for it. We are to have spirit controlled emotions. So the goal is no buttons or triggers. And some people might think, well, I don't even know what life would be like without that. Well, no time like the present to start growing. So, to the extent that somebody can push your buttons or pull your trigger, I guess, right, is the extent to which you are unstable, meaning you're then emotionally stable to the extent that somebody's willing to cooperate, not pushing your buttons or triggers. Okay, so the goal is to be able to be in control whether people are cooperating or not. And that has also to do with your boundaries. If things are unfinished, you will not be able to be fully emotionally present in the moment. So therefore, you're going to bring too much or too little to any given situation. So it will impact your boundaries. So that's why things need to be brought up to the present. But one of the issues, again, that's mentioned in counseling oftentimes, and understandably, is the issue of forgiveness. Because we don't want to be unforgiving. Of course we don't, because Jesus said, unless we forgive, then we are not going to be forgiven. But if I have to be told to forgive, then I probably have lost sight of what should be natural in response to what God did for us. So nobody really should have to tell us to be forgiving. It's very natural. That's going to be one of the fruits of the Spirit, by the way, because once somebody becomes a Christian, once somebody is reconciled to God, you understand how much you had hurt God's heart. You understand how much He forgave you. You're not going to have to be reminded to be forgiving. If you have a situation where somebody's walking around unforgiving, they give a lot of evidence. Sorry. There we go. I got my mute button. They give a lot of evidence that they actually are not the real deal, that they're not a Christian. Because God's heart is for forgiveness when it meets the right criteria. And that's 1 John 1:9. If we confess our sins, that's the key, by the way. That is our responsibility. If we confess, then he's faithful and just to forgive. The responsibility lies on the guilty party. If we don't confess, are we ever forgiven? The answer is no. As a matter of fact, who ends up going to hell? That sounds funny. No, how does somebody go to hell? Well, they don't have their sins forgiven. Why don't they have their sins forgiven? Because they haven't confessed. So hell will be filled with people who did not feel the need to confess. So those are people that are recalcitrant, who are not humble, and therefore they never confess their sins, and therefore they never received forgiveness because they never asked. Is God unforgiving to not forgive the sins that they didn't ask for? Of course not. We read a meme last time before the break. I'll bring it up again because it's emotionally seductive, meaning there's something about it that sounds right, but it's filled with falsehood. And therefore, since only the truth is going to set us free, this will keep somebody stuck. It says, I never knew how strong I was until I had to forgive someone who wasn't sorry and accept an apology I never received. Well, you don't accept an apology that was never received because it hasn't been received. And if somebody doesn't send you a letter, do you ever receive the letter and open it? No, because it was never sent. That's a great, that little meme is so filled with psychobabble. And what that will do is, and the person that said it, they're probably sincere, right? This is very poetic. I never knew how strong I was. And by the way, that's really based on their emotions. Why? Because they're gonna forgive someone who isn't sorry. It's impossible, just like trying to fly out the fifth-story window. It's not possible because you're not strong enough. It's just, it ain't going to happen. Right? And accept an apology that was never received. That person wrote that in a moment of time, probably feeling very emotional. And so they, quote unquote, forgave someone that was not sorry and forgave someone regardless of whether or not that person ever acknowledged and ever confessed, and they never said they were sorry. Well, I'll tell you exactly what happens to that kind of person, probably a month or 2 or 3 or 4. A few months later, what's going to happen? They're going to start to show evidence of compulsive behaviors. They're going to have to do something with the truth that lies within them. What is the truth that lies within them? What is it trying to tell them? That they were hurt by someone that didn't care, and so they were negatively impacted. And prior to the break, we began looking at degrees of impact. God does not want us playing mind games with ourselves. Okay, we'll get this. We'll get this. I'm a little rusty at the technology here. Okay, so we were looking at a chart that should help people understand that when we're talking about not forgiving someone, it's not talking about the level 1s or 2s in life. Those are the accidents and the human error. We all do those, and hopefully we have enough patience, we have enough understanding that we don't really allow those things to bother us. But also, hopefully we're around people that what? Here's the chart, that are at a positive 1 or higher. If you're hanging around someone that is in the minus categories, what's going to happen as they are, not when, but as they are hurtful? Look at the dump or dumpee relationship. The person on the right is hurtful. They are oppressive. Yet, if you could see their face, I'll bring it up. We'll zoom in. That's the face. So the person on the right, are they sorry? No. The person on the right, is it accidental? No. The person on the right, is it intentional? Of course. The person on the right, do they ever intend to stop? No. So, how long could the dumping process go on, and how low could they go? They're going to go as low as the person on the left, the injured party, is willing to take them. So, in order to have boundaries, you have to be sure what is or isn't true. And if somebody tells you you have to forgive, even though the other person is not sorry, then they are setting you up to not have boundaries and have no discernment. That's going to do nothing other than tie you in emotional knots. So we talked about the last time we were talking about the issue of defining. Now, what are we talking about? What is or isn't forgiveness? So, just to repeat it momentarily, what we're not talking about is giving oneself the right or permission to hold on to something they should have let go. Okay, when you think about the minor stuff in life, the ones and the twos, that's stuff that you should let go. Certainly the ones, but we'll say the ones and the twos. Now, if someone is doing that habitually, really more than a week or two, the question is, have you brought that up to them? Have you been addressing these issues along the way? Oftentimes, what happens is the person that feels guilty, quote unquote, for not forgiving is dealing with someone that was not sorry, but not sorry for the things that are way up there. So we have thoughtless and carelessness. Look at between 5 and 6. That's bad enough, but there's no excuse for that. But we would call that, I'm going to call that emotional, negligence, right? That'll be between 3 and 4. So I'm using the idea that, let's say I take my car and I hit yours with it. There's going to be degrees of impact. And when we're trying to assess damage, think about that. So if I'm driving my car and I hit your car, the police are going to be called and they're going to begin to assess both damage and degrees of responsibility. Let's say you were really injured. Well, the insurance company is going to want, payment. But are there criminal charges? Well, it all depends, right? It depends upon what? Depends upon this chart. So a police officer is going to investigate. What are they investigating? Up at the top, degree of negative intentionality. To what extent did the person intend to what extent did I intend to hit your car? If I'm a crazy person and it was road rage and I rammed into your car, now it's intentional, though it may have been emotionally reactive. It doesn't matter that I intended to harm your car. Then it's going to assess the degree of impact and then the degree of willful disregard. Did I care about you? Did I care about the outcome? So one is, what's going on in my mind? I wanted to hurt you. Did I care about whether or not you were hurt? That has to do with empathy, by the way. Remorse has to do with also the degree of impact. Do I care? And then, am I sorry? And then the extent to which my actions impacted you. So law enforcement is going to be investigating all of that. So if you tell someone that all impact is impact, all sin is sin, that's a distortion. So how about someone that forgets? Well, I was going to say forgets Valentine's. If a guy does, somebody may be having to take somebody out for dinner. I get it, right? That probably could be a big deal. That is a big deal, right? If I forget important dates. Now, it could be that somehow, for whatever reason, it's a 1, 2, or 3. Oh, how about if somebody was actually sick and I got distracted? Well, that's a fault then. That's a -1. When would a spouse be upset? Let's say there's a nice dinner planned. This could be on either party, and your spouse is late. As a matter of fact, your spouse doesn't show. Well, what are your emotions going to be like? Probably pretty high until you start to find out why. So the facts are the facts. The degree of negative impact the person never showed. So that's high, right? But now it's going to look at to what extent did they intend and to what extent did they care. So to what extent did they care? That's degree of willful disregard. and negative intentionality. So they may have had the best of intentions. They would never have done that, but something happened that prevented them from being there. It would be like you are driving, but your child all of a sudden starts choking. And what happens? You are distracted, and now you hit, let's say you hit a pedestrian that's crossing the street. You didn't even see this. So now we have a severe bodily injury. If not, sometimes you can have vehicular manslaughter, or somebody dies, but now is it going to be an accident, or are they going to charge you? And if so, with what? Well, it all depends. So I'm going to bring the chart back up. They will assess then to what extent. Now we know the negative impact. Let's say somebody died. Let's say you hit somebody in a crosswalk. Now we're going to find out to what extent did you intend to do that, and to what extent were you paying attention, or was there willful disregard? If you were distracted because a passenger in your vehicle was dying, was choking to death, again, a death has occurred, but what was going on for the person behind the wheel? It really does matter. And God takes that into account. That's why it says if we pray for wisdom, we will know what is right, just, and fair. Fair takes into account context. So if you tell someone that they have to forgive a, a, a negative impact, or what was it? They never knew how strong they were until they had to forgive someone who was not sorry. So find that person on this chart. Well, everybody on this chart should be sorry, right? But the question is, would they notice? Well, maybe a level 1, they're not going to notice. But if they continue doing level 1s, then it starts to have a compounding effect, right? And that's why over time, you can have a compounding effect. We call it the straw that broke the camel's back. And if somebody continues to dump and dump, the question is, why haven't you addressed it by that time? So once somebody does find out, are they willing to acknowledge? And if they acknowledge, then there is confession, and then we can have mercy. But if somebody doesn't acknowledge, then there's nothing to forgive, and you are not you are not unforgiving. So again, what we are not talking about is giving one's self the right to hold on to something they should let go. Meaning, if somebody has acknowledged, if somebody has confessed, that of course you need to forgive that. But again, the onus and responsibility is on the person who has perpetrated the offense. Okay, so again, what are we not talking about? We are not talking about giving ourselves permission to be mean and nasty. And that's oftentimes what it seems like, what it sounds like to someone who hasn't thought this through. So they might ask, well, I know that person sexually molested you, but have you forgiven them? Well, I know they've never confessed. As a matter of fact, I know they still look at you and say, I don't remember that. As a matter of fact, I think you're fabricating it, or I don't know what you're talking about. So, is there anything to forgive? No. Are you being mean and nasty for not forgiving that person? Of course not. But it also isn't, it's not referencing someone that makes a big deal out of, I'm going to bring the chart up again, out of the ones, the level 1s or 2s. As a matter of fact, oftentimes what you'll find is this: someone that tends to make a big deal of level 1 and 2 offenses really will minimize level 10 offenses, because oftentimes they are doing that. They're perpetrating 8, 9s, and 10s, not acknowledging it, but they are the letter of the law when it comes to 1s and 2s. So it's very telling when someone makes a big deal of small issues and says, ha, gotcha. Okay, that's not God's heart. That is not the issue of what we're talking about as far as being, not forgiving someone. Okay, it doesn't mean that somebody is crouching, ready to gotcha, ready to take the person to the woodshed. That is not what we're talking about. So this is not giving somebody permission to be mean and nasty if you say that you don't have to forgive someone if they've never asked for it, because there's nothing to forgive. Again, what are we not talking about? We're not talking about resentment and bitterness that comes from a myopic selfishness. which may have come from hurt. This is the only time that I'm willing to consider the phrase hurt people, okay, the first time. Okay, so you're wrestling with something and you're emotionally raw and you say something or you do something. So you were hurt and now you've been hurtful. Okay, so really ultimately, hurt people do not hurt people. Selfish people hurt people on a continuing basis. So if you are emotionally reactive and you've said something or done something that hurts someone, what do you need to do? You need to go and make it right. You need to confess so that you can honor their pain. And we will continue our deep dive into what forgiveness is and what forgiveness is not. We'll see you next time.